So what I want to do is introduce you to Jacquie. Just want to say a few words about Jacquie. I first met Jacquie when she came over to our first Viva event here in Spain a couple of years ago, and we invited her to be a speaker. And one of the things I remember very clearly is I always remember her introducing herself in her sessions as a human being. And actually, we've just been chatting beforehand, and she said she's always on team human being. So I think she still feels the same. But as well as a human being, she's also an international speaker, a business consultant, and a life coach. And she's the founder and CEO of a non-profit principles-based campaigning and wellbeing consultancy. So Jacquie has a wealth of experience as a trainer, activist, and a campaigner for political improvements in Scotland and the UK to improve health, mental wellbeing, and equality, especially for disadvantaged communities. So Jacquie, welcome to this our final call in the Telesummit. I'm delighted to have you here with us.
I'm delighted to be asked to come and speak, Sheila. It's a wonderful, I know, and it's lovely, for people to nominate you, and it's lovely to be able to share a message with people. But it's also a delight to be part of something that the CSC is putting together. It's always lovely to be able to support them in their work. And thank you for that lovely introduction. Yes, I always describe myself as a human being. And you're right, I'm on Team Humanity. That's what I'm interested in. And I had a bit of a giggle with everybody beforehand when I said, I'm always on Team Humanity, except when it comes to Scottish independence. And I have some political beliefs around that. The reason that I chose the topic of spiritual activism is because there's so much happening in the world at the moment with all of the various governments in all of the countries in the world changing, and people starting to see through layers of their own thinking with regards to how countries work, how the media works, how the system works or doesn't work in our favour. Questions about democracy, questions about whether we as citizens have a right to question those that are in office. And I always say this, I never say a government is in power, because they're not in power, they're in office. They're in office to serve the citizens of that country. But far too often the governments believe that they're in power and they can do exactly what they want to do while they're in power. And I think we're seeing that all around the world at the moment. So how does we as human beings cope with that? How do we deal with that? What do we do to make our voice heard? And spiritual activism, for me, isn't about religion. It's not about dogma. It's activism. It's activism that comes from the heart and from the head. It's compassionate and it's loving. It's got a sense of self-determination and interdependence. It's activism that serves humanity instead of dividing humanity. About 6 years ago, for those of you that don't know me, I work and live mainly in Scotland with my political campaigning work, and my campaigning work is all to do with the principles these days. About 5 or 6 years ago, I noticed in the Scottish Parliament that they didn't have a cross-party group, which was a gathering of people who would look at the whole person. The whole person in the sense of not just their diseases, not just their health, but also their well-being. And their well-being includes where they live, can they find work, all sorts of aspects, and their opportunities. So I campaigned for a group in the Scottish Parliament, it's called a cross-party group, on health inequalities. Because many, many people in disadvantaged communities are not given the same opportunities as people who are, we call them the worried well, those that know how to work the system. It took me about 2 or 3 months to have this cross-party group started, and it's been running now for 6 or 7 years. And I acted as the secretariat for it, and I did that on a voluntary basis, helping the politicians, bring in speakers who would educate the policymakers and who would educate the parliamentarians and all of us who sat around the table. I never realised it at the time, but in hindsight, when I campaigned for that political group to be started in the Scottish Parliament, it was done very gently. It was done from a place of love, knowing that there was something that we weren't addressing. There was something there where we could see more and we could help more. That there were people out there who had a voice and who could contribute to an improved discussion about how do we improve health inequalities. It's easy to get caught up in our heads about the right way to do something and the wrong way to do something. But when you come from a place of kindness and from a place of love, with absolutely no attachment to what is to happen next, and I think that's what's really, really important. I knew that what I was to do was to help get this political group started. I didn't feel that it was my job to keep pushing and striving to make things happen unless that occurred to me. I look around the world at the moment and I see it as well. A couple of years ago, Scotland went through an independence referendum. It was so peaceful and so joyful to see the nation coming together with their own opinions of what being an independent Scotland or being part of the Union was all about. Yes, there were people who had heated discussions and there were people who had humorous discussions. But the whole point was people were discussing it in a way that was informative, in a way that they got to share their opinion about what they thought was right and what was true. There were some factions where violence erupted, but it was quickly put to bed and put to rest. Despite what the media said about Scotland being a divided country. And this is what I've come to see, that what I read and what I see in the media and in television isn't necessarily the truth. It isn't necessarily the truth, and I don't have to be scared of what's happening. Because we've said it all along, we keep saying it all along, our well-being isn't dependent on our external circumstances, no matter what's happening. And I know many of you listening are probably living in the States at the moment, and you're going through quite an interesting time. But if it's anything like what happened in Scotland, it is an absolutely amazing opportunity for people to raise their consciousness, to see through the layers of political activity, of the media activity, and to start to see the truth and to start to question the truth. When I think of what is a spiritual activist, it made me laugh because essentially we take both of these words, spiritual. The word spiritual really means breath, breathe, it's life. And activism means to take action. But as a human being, that is our essence. Our spiritual essence is there. We can't help but be spiritual. And activism is just the inspired action that we all take every single day, whether it's a conversation with a neighbour, or whether it's a conversation with a politician, or with a support group or a group that's trying to change things. We get hung up in the concept of, oh, I'm not a spiritual activist, I don't do anything, I don't go marching and protesting. It's not about that. It's about gently and lovingly saying what it is that you have to say when you have to say it to the people that you have to say it to. To me, that's spiritual activism. And each and all of us has a role in that. Whether you're the person who's making the cup of tea at the rallies where people are getting together, whether you're the person who's behind the scenes doing the IT, or whether you're just a person who's having gentle conversations with someone who maybe doesn't believe in the same political ideology as you. We all have a part to play. And in that taking action can be sending love, healing energy to people. It can be supporting the cause and helping to co-create other activities or news or conversations with other people. But in doing that, each and all of us have to reach into being human. And in that being human is compassion. Just because somebody doesn't have the same ideas that we have about something doesn't make them a monster. It simply makes them someone who sees life differently from you. And I know there are circumstances where that is very, very hard to actually to face in life, to think it's true if someone's being persecuted for being a certain colour or a certain religion. But again, I go back to nothing can take away our well-being. That is intact in each and all of us. When we reach into our compassion for humanity, we start to see the person who has their own perspective, they're living in their own reality, they're having their own thoughts which form their opinions and their judgments. They may be misguided, but they may not be. And it's only in gentle conversations, loving conversations, that we can actually find out what it is that's going on in this other person's head, if that's possible. And in doing that, it's being open, it's being teachable. That's the way I always feel when I'm working on a campaign. I've worked in campaigns for alcohol addiction, drug abuse, various health conditions. And I always start from the point of knowing nothing. When I go into a conversation with someone, my mind is blank. And I listen. I listen for a feeling from them, resting in a feeling of, I know who I am in this moment. Listening to what they have to say and listening to their version of reality. I think that's crucially important, is understanding other people's version of reality. And listening to hear what potentially complicates their version of reality. That's so important for me as well as for them. And seeing that in those discussions, these discussions, seeing that people will always have their own ideas about how life works, how the system works. We all have preferences. We all have comfort zones where we feel more at ease. It doesn't challenge our safe zone of thinking, our safe zone of being. And I think that's the beauty of people who have an understanding of the principles, who understand truth, is that they can reach into that space of being, which to some may look uncomfortable. But when you're coming from that place of love, that place of wanting to understand with a clear mind, it just feels easier to rest in that space of being rather than being uncomfortable. Because uncomfortable is just, it's coming from thought. I always love when I'm working with people that there is a sense of interdependence, joining together, but not depending on one another, each with our own skills, each with our own opportunities to learn and to grow and to challenge. And I want to make it very, very clear that activism is not always about being quiet and still. There are moments, and we all know when those moments are, when the opportunity is to rise up and be loud. But it's the certainty of knowing, especially with this understanding of the principles, that knowing that where we're coming from is absolute truth. The certainty in that for me is huge. Knowing that I understand how life works. Knowing that I understand how people work. Knowing that that can all change in an instant with another thought. That nothing is fixed, nothing is permanent. And that we can all change our minds from one moment to the next. There's a lovely story that my future son-in-law told me. Craig, he works in a prison, and he was saying that there was a prisoner came in, and this prisoner was very, very angry and shouting and fighting, and the prison guards were finding it very, very difficult to calm him down because it was anger meeting anger. And when anger meets anger, more anger erupts. And Craig stood and watched. And his colleague said, "Why are you not getting involved?" And he said, "Just be quiet. Don't respond to him. Just be quiet." And the prisoner kept going off and off and off and shouting and screaming and trying to fight. And nobody did anything. And then he threatened to hit Craig. And Craig just looked at him and smiled. And the prisoner, this really riled the prisoner. And so he started to lash out. And again, Craig did nothing. And his colleague said to him, in front of the prisoner, "Why are you not doing anything about this, Craig?" And Craig says, "I'm too good looking. He could never hit anybody as good looking as me." And the beautiful thing about that was, in that humour, it diffused the situation, completely diffused it. The prisoner ended up laughing. There's a lightheartedness that we all have that we often forget about when life gets heavy, or we think it gets heavy. We start to believe in more and more of what we're seeing and what we're feeling. But it's in the lightheartedness, it helps us see things more clearly. It helps us make fun of ourselves. And it helps us lighten other people up as well. I guess in my journey over the last sort of 6 or 7 years in campaigning and doing the work that I've done, especially with an understanding of the principles coming more and more into my life, and my certainty has just been growing over the years. It's been able to embrace my vulnerability, being able to speak to people from my heart and say what it is I need to say, and doing that from a place of confusion, misunderstanding, curiosity, hurt even. Asking them, explain to me, talk to me about why this isn't happening or why this is happening. Tell me, why do you think the way you think? Always open instead of aggressively challenging what another human being thinks. Because we're all entitled. All of us are entitled to have an opinion. Just because that opinion doesn't agree with the opinion that you have doesn't mean to say that it's right, and it doesn't mean to say that it's wrong. It's all a misunderstanding. And what I've come to see is that when people come from that place of love and kindness, that opportunity, that space that opens up, not only for ourselves, but for other people to come in and meet us there, to have those open discussions, those conversations, to share our misunderstandings. I think something I'm really impressed with at the moment, and I'm really looking forward to seeing the videos, is Amy Chen has been having conversations with supporters of Trump. She's opened her heart. She's shown vulnerability and a willingness to be open to someone else's opinion about what they believe. Because it's the same in religion. When we get people who are so fixed in their beliefs about life and the way that they see life, there is no room, and I always say there's no room to dance. There's no room to play, because it's either black or white, it's right or it's wrong. But there's a beautiful space in between right and wrong where people can meet and people can talk about life and what that means to everyone. Spiritual activism is a concept. That's all it is. It's a concept. And every human being on this planet, every single day and every single moment, is taking action. They're doing what they feel they're meant to do from the place of spirit, whether they know it or not. Sometimes with clouds and layers of misunderstanding of thought on top of it. Everyone's doing the best that they can in any given moment of time. And just because we can't see that immediately doesn't mean to say that it's wrong. So I don't know, Sheila, if anybody wants to ask a question or...
Not so far, if you want to continue.
I think integrity is incredibly important here as well. And what I found when I'm having these sort of interesting, challenging conversations with people, and even I'm using the words interesting and challenging, but I may call that up as well. It's really just a conversation. If I go in and I think it's challenging or I think it's uncomfortable, that's what I'm going to experience. Whereas if I go into that conversation from a place of neutrality, then I'm just going to have a conversation. And this is what I do when I speak to many of the politicians that I speak with. And people always ask me, you know, Jacquie, you're getting in and speaking to these politicians about spirituality and about the principles, and do they get it? And it was interesting. The first time I went in to speak, I hadn't long come past sort of my first training with the principles, but I knew I had to go in and speak to this politician. And it was at that stage, and I'm sure many of you all have experienced it as well, where you can't find the words. You know, sort of, you feel as though you're talking, but you're just not making any sense. You're blabbing. And in my head, I thought, I can't mention mind, thought, and consciousness because he'll think I'm a complete idiot. And I don't know why I had that thought going round and round in my head. So I was using all the words in the dictionary that didn't say that, I'm sure. And at the end of the conversation, he said something to me. He said, Jacquie, he says, I have a Buddhist monk that comes to visit me. He says, what you're talking about sounds spiritual. I just thought, here am I in the middle of a conversation feeling like I'm talking utter rubbish. But the feeling came through. The feeling of what it was I was trying to communicate. And some people say it's like choose courage over comfort when you want to have these kinds of conversations. But I always say to them as well, that's a concept too. What is courage? What is comfort? They're just thought. They're thought in the moment. They don't really mean anything. Again, coming from this space of neutrality, anything can happen. It doesn't really matter what anybody says. And another time I went to see another politician. I was trying to ask him if he would sponsor a meeting for him in the Parliament about the principles. and he was very, very busy. And the minute that I get into his office, he put on his stopwatch on his phone, his iPhone, and he put it in front of me. And he told me that I had 5 minutes to speak to him. Now, me 10 years ago would have got really up in my head. I would have thought how rude this man was. How could I possibly say what I was going to say in 5 minutes? And in doing that, my head would have become overwhelmed with all the thoughts that were cascading around in my head, and I wouldn't have been able to think clearly. But I saw his situation and where he was, and he was the one that was caught up in his thoughts. He was the one that was busy-minded. So coming from essence, coming from spirit, coming from that state of neutrality, I just started to talk to him about Sid Banks and about the purity of this message and how simple it was for people to understand and how this could help mental ill health in Scotland immensely. From the 5 minutes that he'd already said that I could have, an hour and a half later, we were still discussing this understanding. So that kind of bluff that people give you about, I don't have time to talk, I don't want to talk, I have my own opinion, that's okay. That's absolutely fine. But what I found is, even just having that gentle conversation, it's like, that's great, tell me more about how you think. Instead of, well, I think you're wrong because you support this or you're doing that. It's like, okay, tell me more. How does this work? What are your beliefs around this? I'm trying to understand. And I love that because it opens everything up. It opens people up to be who they are without fear of judgment. And how often does that actually happen in this world? That people can be who they actually are, holding their beliefs in front of you and explaining them to you with a wide open heart, without you judging them and telling them they're right or they're wrong. Listening for wisdom to kick in, for the point where you can say what it is you're meant to say. I'm not saying you're going to understand or you're going to take on anybody else's beliefs or opinions, especially when they're sort of so polar opposite to what you believe. But it leaves room for another conversation. And sometimes one conversation isn't enough. It's about a series of gentle conversations. And that's what I'm doing with my campaigning. It's a series of gentle conversations. Years and years ago, I worked for a pharmaceutical company, and I worked as a government affairs manager, and my job was to create campaigns strategically to raise the profile of certain disease processes and to work with stakeholders to build a campaign. And every time I saw someone, I would have call objectives and next call objectives, and I'd have a list that an army commander would have been proud of how I monitored this. It blows me away when I see the way that I work now, in that I'm always listening to wisdom. I'm always listening for insight. If it feels right, I do it. If it doesn't feel right, I don't do it. Years ago, I would probably have had 20 or 30 people on my list of targets, people I had to see to make something happen. Whereas now, I don't have a list. I have people that I've had conversations with, politicians I've had conversations with, and policymakers who I felt something from them. I've seen that they've seen something, and there's a connection that's developed. Something's formed between us, so that the opportunity for me to go back in again and say, hey, can we talk about this? And what I've been doing over the years is gently bringing a different conversation to them, different information to them, gently, lovingly, and with an open heart, expecting absolutely nothing in return. I'm not doing this campaigning in Scotland because I think Scotland's broken, or I think I can fix Scotland, or I think, I want to be spearhead, the whole 3 principles in Scotland. I'm doing it because I can't help myself. I'm doing it because it's what I'm meant to do. I'm doing it because that's where I keep getting guided. And I think when we work from that space and we have conversations from that space, life is easier. It's easier to have conversations that may appear challenging or difficult. And often people don't understand what you're saying.
Yeah.
They just don't understand what you're saying because their minds are too busy. I had a conversation with a female politician, and intellectually she really understood what I was saying, but she kept saying to me, "Oh, that's good thought. Oh yeah, that's bad thought. Oh yeah, that's I get that. That's that kind of thought." And I thought, and I didn't say it to her, but in my mind, it's like it's all thought. And the next thing I found myself telling her a story, and I'm going to apologise to those of you who've heard this story before, but it's one of my most embarrassing moments ever, but it was beautiful. I found myself telling her a story I thought I'd never tell anybody. A story about me as a human being, having human being type thoughts that nobody talks about for fear of being taken away by some psychiatric division of some hospital. And I told her about 2 little dogs that we used to have, and every morning I would take these dogs for a walk. We had 2 little Shih Tzus. And as I was walking the dogs along the road, the dogs would do what dogs always do first thing in the morning, and they would empty their bladders and they would have a poo. And I'm sure in many countries in the world, if your dog does that, you have to put it in a wee bag and not leave it on the side of the street. So I'm telling her this story about me with the dogs, and I'm walking along the road, and the dog did the poo, and I picked it up and I put it in a wee bag. And I told her that every time on my way home I passed a red mailbox. And every single time I passed that red mailbox, I really wanted to post the dog poo in the mailbox. That thought was so freaking compelling. Every single day for about 4 or 5 years. My husband reminded me that it was illegal to do that, and I never ever did it. And I shared this story with her, and she burst out laughing. She threw her head back, she had tears rolling down her face, and she said, "That's just like me when a member of the opposition or the opposite party to me, different political party, walks in front of me and I want to stick my foot out and trip them up. Isn't it, Jacquie?" I said, "Absolutely. That's what anyone would call a compelling thought. And the only difference between you and me and people who end up in prison is we don't act on it because we know and we have a clear mind and we can see that that's not something that we should be doing. Whereas people who end up in prison haven't had that clear mind, or they've been taking something that's made their minds fuzzy, and that thought has made sense to them in the moment. And the conversation went from there to her understanding how these thoughts create our feelings. And they create behaviours and habits and addictions, all from thought. So these are the type of gentle conversations that I'm having. Again, done from a space of love, from a space of kindness, and a space of actually sort of no attachment to it whatsoever. The people often say to me, "Oh, Jacquie, do you expect to get the work when things start happening?" And things are starting to happen. I'm in working with the government where we're looking at different pilot schemes. I'm speaking to nurses later on this year. I've just spoken to social workers. I'm part of a university faculty, bringing the principles into the curriculum for nurses and social workers in one of Scotland's top universities. So things are happening, but not things I would have expected to happen. Because I've always done what I've done with a very light touch. My gran used to always say something to me when I was a kid, and it's maybe an old Scottish saying, I don't know whether it's said all over the world, but it's, what's for you won't go by you.
Right.
Yeah. So if I'm in and I'm doing something, and there's work that I'm meant to do to follow on from that, it'll happen. But if it's stuff that I'm not meant to do, then that's okay too, because I'm not meant to do it. But as a human being, a spiritual being, who feels that call to be an activist, a change maker, a person who is taking action, there's a joy in that. There's a joy in being able to show up and just take things on as they happen and as I experience them, rather than planning as I would have done beforehand. So I think there's a question there, Sheila.
There's a comment and a question. Judy said, love what you're saying, but she has to go. She's going to buy the series and listen later. Yay, Judy.
Love you, Judy.
Anonymously, somebody's asking, how did you learn of the 3 principles?
Oh, many years ago, I came across Richard Carlson's books. I was working in the corporate sector and I was just stressed out my head. And I came across the Don't Sweat the Small Stuff by Richard Carlson about 30 years ago, I think. That's when I first came across the principles, but I didn't know they were the principles because Richard doesn't talk about them or didn't talk about them in that way. So what I learned in those books really helped me. And I went down the path of knowing that I thought too much. I knew that I was a thinker, and I spent years studying things like NLP and hypnosis to try to control and manipulate my thoughts. And then I went on a weekend intensive with a couple of mentors, and something really happened to me that I wasn't expecting. I'd always been searching. And on this 2-day course, I woke up one morning, the second morning, and I had this visual in my head of a neon sign and 2 flags, and one of the flags was in my brain. Well, the 2 were, one was on the right side of my brain and one was on the left side of my brain. They were white flags, and the neon light that I could see said surrender. And as a control freak at the time, that was pretty illuminating for me, that was something that I was meant to be, a direction that I was meant to be looking in. And so from that weekend, I was introduced to the principles. And I just found after that I had a voracious appetite. I always say to people, it's like becoming a vampire. When vampires become vampires, they have this insatiable thirst. They just want to keep taking blood. But for me, it was like all the materials I could get a hold of said, all of the books, any recordings I could get. And I knew that I wanted to formally study the principles. So I studied with the One Thought Institute in London. And I went so quickly from searching, decades of searching, feeling broken, feeling that I needed to fix myself, even with all these NLP techniques and everything else. I went from searching to absolutely knowing that the principles were the truth. the certainty was mind-blowing for me, because I'd seen through Richard Carlson's writings the simplicity of this understanding, and then to have the opportunity to read Sid's books, especially The Missing Link, which is a phenomenal book that points you to the spiritual essence of the principles. For me, that book's all the training you need. It's got absolutely everything in it, and gives us all an opportunity to really sort of rest in the space between the words of what Sid's pointing to. So I formally learned about the principles, but I informally learned about them over quite a few years. But also, and it's really interesting because my dad lived from this space, and I didn't see it. I really didn't see it. It was the most content, loving, unjudgmental person I've ever met in my life. And my husband actually lives from this space. Same space. And that's what I love, is being gentle, being powerful. Because the love that I feel for Team Humanity is so huge that I want to be there having those conversations, not because I feel I have to do something to fix it, but because it's what I'm meant to do. I'm compelled to do it. Life is so beautiful, and the media would have you believe that it's not. Could you imagine? The news as we know it just now is fascinating, absolutely fascinating, because it's all about, if you watch the news, it's about death, murder, all sorts of things going on. Could you imagine the news? And the news is Mrs. Mackenzie had a wonderful birthday party. Mr. Blogg's family came to visit. The children in the school are so happy and they're learning about a wonderful understanding. And then there's one wee story about what's actually happened that feels a bit sad or a bit negative. But that's not the way the media work. The media work to keep us in fear. Fear, to frighten us. Mm-hmm. I spoke to you earlier about sort of the referendum in Scotland in 2014, and we called it Project Fear because we could see it in the media. It was laughable what they were doing. Absolutely laughable. And the same thing's happening in the States. If they keep you in fear, you become paralysed. But here's the thing. They can't keep you in fear. Only you can. Because you're believing the power of thought in the moment. And that's what I find actually quite funny, is that we buy into what we're being told. We buy into other people's opinions instead of standing our ground, but from this space of love and certainty that's completely unshakable, because we know the truth. There's not many people who know the truth. I always think people who understand the principles are evolved. I think we're evolved human beings. Not that gives us a wee badge to put on, but to know that you know something that can lead someone else into that heart space, that space where they can rise into themselves, be who they're meant to be. I love that. I just think that is such a gift to be able to do that with people. And when we spoke about sort of spiritual activism and sort of traits of people who are spiritual activists, but even that's a misnomer because we're all spiritual activists. But the people who are on the front line, the people who are pushing the boundaries, and even the boundaries don't exist. I'm sorry. It's just like, you know, the boundaries don't exist, rules don't exist. They're all made up. They're all made up by somebody. And I've always been naughty, so I've always pushed at boundaries because I never really see them as being real, to see just how far I can push before somebody bites back. And then I find that funny, which is just terrible.
Can I just interrupt you a second with that?
It's just how I think.
Yeah. Sorry, Jacquie. Just wanted to acknowledge there's a few comments. There's a few comments come in and a question, I think. Mm-hmm. So Valerie Maguire says it's beautiful to hear you speak, Jacquie, as you come from such a heart place. That's great.
Oh, love to you, Valerie.
Diane Macmillan, who was on just before you, says it's so lovely to listen to you. Very helpful for me to consider Jacquie's quiet, gentle power, the same power that Jacquie sees in all of us, to be social activists without the anger and frustration that I sometimes feel in the face of all the hateful speech and injustice I see in America lately. I really appreciate what she's saying, what Jacquie's saying. I just wanted to share.
Thank you, Diane.
And anonymously, we've got a question. As you began and expanded your 3 principles work, how did you begin connecting and collaborating with others?
And it's a really lovely question, and I'm going to tell you there's no doing in that. Mm-hmm. There's no doing in that whatsoever. I mean, it's happened to me again this week that people have got in touch with me to say, do you want to collaborate on something? And we're looking at a project with the English Rugby Union, which I don't know, being Scottish, how I feel about that, but just joking, I'm on Team Humanity. And a project with leaders and some other stuff with the Scottish Parliament. I always believe, to answer your question, that my 3P work has expanded because I show up. I show up as who I am. And who I am is who I am at my core, at my essence. The rest of it fluctuates. One minute I can be a kind person, the next minute I can not be a kind person. One minute I can be laughing, one minute I'll be crying, one minute I can be generous, one minute I'm not generous. But at my essence, at my core, the certainty that I have for this understanding is rock solid. And no one will shift me from that space. That this is the future, that this is how we educate and inform society. This is how we awaken other people. And so when I show up and I speak at events, or I write, or I have conversations with people, people feel that. They feel that essence. They feel that strength. They feel that love. They feel neutrality. And that has attracted people to me. And something really interesting happened to me last week about me reaching out to someone or a couple of people. I'd had a thought for the last 2 months or so about getting in touch with a couple of women that I knew years and years ago in the NLP field. It's been over a decade since I've spoken to them. Something kept going around in my head that said, I have to contact them, I have to contact them. But I never did it. I didn't take action with it. There was no action to take. It was just a thought. This is something I have to do. And last Friday morning, I was sitting at my computer, and that thought came back into my head, and it was time. So I wrote to these 2 women to ask them if they would be interested in having a conversation to see if there was a possibility for us to collaborate in anything. Now, these women are not three principles trained. They're both NLP trained. They're women I worked with years ago. So essentially, to the outside world, we're coming from three different modalities, three different ways to share health. But in my heart, I knew that we were all coming from the same heart space. I could feel it. It felt so strong. So my email to them was, I would love to have a conversation with you, because I know that even though we're coming from different modalities, we're coming from the same heart space, and there's a powerful message in that now for society, especially for women. And I've had the most amazing conversations with them. And one of the women that I spoke with, she told me about her journey. And she recently had a terrible accident on a mountain in Scotland. She fell off this mountain and broke her leg. And she was alone. And she was alone in the mountain for 9 hours. And this woman is speaking to me about truth. Everything's from the inside out, Jacquie. I've spent hundreds and thousands of pounds on trying to figure out how to work my brain, but everything's from the inside out, Jacquie. She's never read a Michael O'Neill book. She's never read any of Sid Banks stuff. She saw it for herself in those moments of vulnerability. And she said to me, tell me what these three principles are. And I said, there's no point. There's no point, because you're coming from that space. The principles are a description of how life works. Mm-hmm. They're not a prescription. They're not every call or every meeting or everything you're meant to do. You're meant to talk about the three principles. I just don't do that. I have an open heart and an open mind when I go to speak with people. And in that speaking to people, whatever arises in me arises within me. So I've kind of answered your question, but I haven't answered your question. For me, beginning to connect and collaborating with others is something that you will feel for yourself. Have the conversations. I've had so many conversations with such beautiful souls all over the world, but I haven't wanted to work with all of them. And that's okay. Mm-hmm. They haven't wanted to work with me either, because I can seem a bit scatty sometimes and a bit odd. And that's okay. You know, we all have our own unique take on life and the way that we live and the way that we work. Just go out there and have conversations. And this is what I mean when I say show up. I hope I've answered that.
Well, can always ask if there's, the anonymous person, if that answered your question, let us know. And if it didn't, let us know too.
But I'd love to hear anybody else's sort of questions or comments, or, you know, are they being activists? Do they feel as though they're being activists? Would they like to be activists? Is what I'm saying making sense? That really we all have that potential within us. And it's, again, seeing beyond these concepts and these barriers that we put in front of ourselves that say, oh, I can't be an activist because I don't have a background in X or I don't have a background in Y. It's about understanding that as a human being, you can't help but be an activist. I mean, hello, mums, think about this. Your child's at school and your child is having an issue with one of the teachers or isn't learning. What do? You listen to your heart and then you go and do what you need to do at the school. Essentially, that's, excuse me, inverted commas, that's activism. And it's spiritual activism because it's coming from the heart. It's taking action to help another human being. I think one thing I'd love to say, Sheila, that I've not spoken about is, for me, the gift within the principles is that many people who are on the front line and doing kind of hardcore activism, you know, that they're setting up protests, they're, you know, gathering people around them, they're leading huge big rallies or whatever. And they're having to do it for years and years and years. For me, something that I've seen is the principles have allowed me to understand how I work as a human being. Unfortunately, a lot of the people who are out there and being very active and being very forceful are doing it from a place of anger. They're doing it from a place of frustration. When you do anything from that space of frustration and anger, what happens is you deplete yourself. You deplete your energy. And in that depletion of your energy, your mood becomes lower. And as your mood lowers, your thinking becomes less clear. What the principles point us to is self-care. Understanding when you're tired, when you're overwhelmed, when you need to step back, when you can step forward, when you're becoming frustrated, when you're becoming angry, being able to catch those thoughts, those feelings. And then being able to do that, you don't suffer from burnout. You don't suffer from the frustration or the anger because you know what's happening is thought in the moment taking hold. So there's a lovely gentleness to being able to just step back and go, okay, that's what's going on. I need to rest, or I need to regroup. I need to do something else.
Yeah, we had that on the call yesterday with Ronnie and Karen. I think you were there, weren't you, when we were talking? Yeah. So there's a few comments coming now. Anonymously, enjoying this so much. You're speaking right to my heart. Thank you.
Bless. Thank you.
Martin Rees says, thank you for your words of love and wisdom, Jacquie. I've heard such a lot tonight. Just wonderful. Thanks for showing up and sharing.
Oh, love you, Martin. Hope you're well.
And Kramer Winslow says, I must go. I'll listen again later. It's fabulous in capital letters. Thank you so much. I'm so inspired hearing what you have to say. You're doing a great job, Jacquie. People are just raving. Alison Parsons. Jacquie, this was so helpful. I've been teaching the principles in clinical settings for years, and I've found my way into activism here in the States, mostly related to immigration issues. I love what you're saying, and I'm finding it deeply validating. It's a new audience, and it's so nice to hear your insights from this perspective. So much of Three Principles focus on psychology, clinical, and coaching.
Thank you, Alison.
Yeah, I agree. It's I've heard a lot more what you've been saying, for sure. And this, when you say everybody's been an activist, I would never consider myself an activist, you see. Isn't it funny? I've never.
That's that whole concept. Remember we spoke about this before, Sheila? It's like, oh, I'm a business person. All of a sudden, you've got yourself in a neat wee box, that says, this is who I am. But that's not who you are. That's your ego version of who you think you are. And that always reminds me about who we think people are. And if I can share a wee story, if we've got time.
Yeah, I've still got 10 minutes, yeah.
And this just points to who we think we are and who we think other people are. I was invited in to speak to the Ministry of Defence in Scotland because they were having various issues. And I was sitting in the foyer, I'd signed in, and I was sitting in the foyer waiting to be called up to speak to the person that I was going to be speaking with. And this guy came in, Sheila, with all his war regalia on, all of his medals and, his uniform, and had all his gun and everything with him. And this thought popped into my head, and I felt really, really, really scared. I thought, oh my God, this, I don't like this. I don't like this feeling of being here and he's here. And I felt a bit threatened by it. And then the next thought that popped into my head was, oh my God, he's playing dress up. We're all playing dress up. All of us are playing dress up. Whether you're putting on a suit to go to work, whether you're a fireman or a policeman, whether you're a mum, whether you're a 3P person. I mean, God, we're all humans and we're all playing dress up. It's like you see the videos on YouTube of the policemen who are very hard and harsh about things. That can only ever be how they're thinking in the moment that makes them like that. Fear. So I was just going to say, and then you see videos of cops that are out playing basketball with kids, not living in that zone.
So a couple more comments come in, Jacquie. Some more raving fans you've got here.
Can I just say, I do not want to have raging fans. You're taking the mickey now, I know.
Gretchen Blaze, I hope I'm saying that right. Thank you. And again, thank you. I live in Richmond, California, and at age 78, I'm wondering what's next. The saying, what for you won't go by you, so fits for me. I'm reaching out, waiting with the knowledge that what is for me will show up. Thank you for the reminder.
Oh, bless.
Well, there is a question from Mark Abrahams. I think it's got a question mark at the end. Let me read it to you. Hi, Jacquie. Love to you and thank you. Here, just sharing a thought from Garrett Kramer. Thoughts can't be captured. That's why we have feelings. Any thoughts from you?
No. It's just what Garrett thinks. I can't claim to comment on what Garrett claims. Just no, not at all. Not at all.
Okay.
That's how Garrett sees it, and that's good for Garrett. And who am I to judge that?
Yeah, I think you probably just wanted to comment on it. It's disappeared off my screen now anyway.
Yeah.
And Cheryl Lipsky says, thank you, Jacquie. Thank you, Sheila, Charlotte, and CSA. I think she means CSC. CSC. Thank you, Cheryl, for listening in and being with us. It's great. So, final thoughts, yeah? Yeah,
it was just to sort of, I was a bit cheeky to Mark knows me, so that's absolutely fine. He knows that I'm cheeky. I think, Mark, I don't look into things that deeply. I don't, you know, I just think this understanding is so simple, and we can get caught up in all sorts of dogma around it and ideas about it and analyse it. Thoughts are conscious, thoughts are unconscious. Our feelings do alert us to the fact that we're thinking. That's it for me.
So there's one more anonymous view I'm going to read out and then we'll wrap up. So Mark's come up and said that's cool. It was sort of a joke.
Love you, Mark.
Anonymous. I'm happy to hear you. 3 principles have changed my life. I'm happy with politics right now in America as I look at politics from a more conservative, I suppose, point of view. I find the principles very helpful for understanding the liberal mind and not getting upset about how much dislike there is for our new president's approach. Thank you.
Thank you.
Here we go. Well, looking at the time, I think it's time to start wrapping up. I mean, do you have any final thoughts you want to leave us with before I do my stuff?
I think, again, I'd just say to people, just get out there and live. Just get out there and live and realise that everything changes. You know, if anything is expected in life, is life changes, and sometimes it changes more quickly than others, and our thoughts come and go, and our beliefs about things come and go, though some stay fixed. And it's holding life lightly, and it's only when we hold things so tightly that we get wound up and we get frustrated. So just by approaching life with this light-hearted look and speaking to people from that place of love and that place of neutrality and being curious about why they believe what they believe, it means that you've got an opportunity to influence gently, not in a way that's divisive or in a way that's combative. And when you do that and the conversation is open for another time, you just take it step by step, rather than thinking, I have an opportunity to speak to someone who doesn't have the same beliefs as me, I have to change them. How would you feel if someone did that to you?
Yeah. I love that. Thank you, Jacquie. That's a really lovely place to leave it. I'm going to read out one more comment. I lied. Iwan Carlson said, love it when you said that this understanding is making life simple. I've come to the same conclusion as you. Love you.
Oh, I love you too, Yvonne.
Yeah. Yvonne. Thank you so much, Jacquie. Thank you for taking the time out to be with us today and share what you see, what you feel, what you hear, because that's all we can do, isn't it, from our own points of view.
That's it.
Yeah, thank you.
Absolutely.